Welcome to another broadcast of MindYourHealthcast.com. And of course, those of you who have been glued to the television or your computer or whatever setup you have to watch the internet, you probably remember that last time I was talking about energy, information in life, part 1. And now we have graduated to part 2. And we're going to give you a lot of information, not nearly as much as I would like to, but it would probably give you indigestion of information if I gave you any more. I'm being a little funny because this is a difficult subject, especially if you're not acquainted with all those things attached to it. The best I can do is to kind of tweak your interest and get you looking on your own, because there is a ton, maybe 2 tons, of books and information out there related to all of this, but it's not things you'll ever hear about because it's not talked about by the current scientific establishment, hardly ever. And if they do, it's in a negative way. And of course, as I've mentioned before, when you get on the internet, pretty much everything you bring up to have to do with natural healing, health as far as diet and nutrition, energetics, homeopathy, herbal medicine. I don't really care what subject it is, if it's other than pharmacology and surgery and radiation. You're going to find this little window pops up by this interesting guy who the only means of support that I can ascertain is from the pharmaceutical industry. Always has this little window that pops up right in the middle of it saying it's total hogwash, there's nothing to it, it's a quacky thing, and anybody has anything to do with it is a quack. You always find that there. And the interesting thing to me is, as I mentioned before, when you look under pulsed electromagnetic therapy, and you can do it yourself, and you bring up hundreds and hundreds of citations of studies being done, the fact that the DNA has approved a device that uses a pulsed electromagnetic field on the head that improves the depressive state, and you'll find that there's other devices now that are coming out, and you'll find that there's numerous universities and research projects going on. In the midst of all these hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of citations, you'll see this one little ad that says, there is absolutely no research to indicate that in any way there can be any effect from pulsed electromagnetic therapy. And so he kind of sticks those in every one of the ads. And I'm only telling you that to have you watch for it and see what the various citations that are given are all around him, saying that something is going on or is true, and he's saying there's absolutely none. And I've thought about maybe taking a pile of those, copying them and sending it to him, but I'm sure he would not bother reading it because it must be unscientific, because he doesn't believe it. So you're going to see a lot of this happening. And the other thing I need to alert you about, I don't think I have done it in time past, but since we're talking about these unusual subjects, wiki information, Wikipedia. You also, when it comes to things related to natural health or natural medicine or energetic medicine or whatever, you have to look other directions also, not just there, because there is a crew of people that are watchdogs for the medical establishment, and they in turn do pretty much the same thing. They get on Wikipedia and they insert things to poo-poo or discount anything that has to do with natural therapy. And my assumption is, and I can't prove this today, but my assumption is that they're being paid for by the pharmaceutical interests to keep people discouraged. I just happened to look in the last day about homeopathy, and of course they have this big, at the end of the article there by some particular person, this homeopathy has had no research to prove its validity. Now that's total hogwash, and I'm not even going to tell you, but you go and search it out for yourself and look at the books that are available, and look at the research studies that are available, and look at the published research results that are available. And we don't even have time to get into those in this particular broadcast, but I'm just alerting you, as I've said before, when you use the internet, there's a tremendous amount of material out there, and it kind of is up to you to look at it. I mean, I click on the centers also to see what they have to say. So look at it from both sides, and you'll have to decide for yourself. But my big purpose of this whole series of broadcasts is to provoke you, bring you information that's both stimulating and in some cases aggravating, and in probably in many cases you're going to go poo-poo about it. But nonetheless, I want to challenge you to go out and prove me wrong, which I'll be happy to. If you can give me the evidence, I'd be happy to change my position, and I've done it over the years on many issues as I've received more valid studies and more valid doctors, researchers, whatever involved. The preponderance of evidence tends to move me in a different direction if it contradicts what I believed. And I don't think there's anybody that can say they don't have any pre-programmed beliefs that they brought from childhood or from their adulthood education that doesn't in some way influence and or block their ability to see clearly. Okay, we've said enough of that. We're talking about energy information, and we are talking about life, meaning how it affects living things in this world and how it keeps living things living. And we are an energy being, contrary to what a lot of people would like to believe, and we are held together by energy. And when that life energy finally leaves the body, guess what happens to it? It just falls apart. One of the nutritional programs that I used to do, and I've decided I'm going to start doing again, involves doing some simple tests that tell you something about how the energy is performing in the body. And when that energy is good, the people feel good and are healthy. Now, it doesn't mean they won't have symptoms now and then as your body encounters poisons from the environment. The whole thing about health is that you're never, ever going to go your whole life and never have a symptom or never feel sick, because we are constantly in contact with and ingesting and breathing in and absorbing in through our skin all kinds of toxic materials that the body doesn't like. Now, when it does that, it's got two choices: is to ignore it and allow it to poison you, or it can create a response against it. And when it creates that response, we're talking about an immunological response. In its basic terms, we're talking about inflammation or something similar to that. It can be a little more complex depending on what the poison is, but bottom line is the body creates a response to help neutralize and remove anything that gets in the body that should not be there. For example, if you get a toxic chemical, and as soon as it hits your stomach, if it's extremely toxic, the body's sensors are going to say, yuck, it shouldn't be here. It's going to send a signal to the vagus nerve to do reverse peristalsis, and you're going to vomit it out real fast. Now, that's one of the first significant responses. If it's not quite as poison, but you get quite a bit in and it gets through the stomach without vomiting it up, it will then create a diarrhea. We'll get it out fast the other direction. And in some cases, you're going to get both. It's going to be so nasty that you're going to trigger a total gastric reaction. You're going to vomit and you're going to create a diarrhea both until that is out and the body has neutralized it. Now, the final course, neutralization, is once the poison gets absorbed, it ultimately, it's got two places to go. It either goes to the lymph first and then to the blood and liver, or it goes directly to the blood and the liver. And in either case, it'll be the liver's job to go through the final neutralization of it and get it out of the body. And so you're going to be sick. So there is nothing you can do to keep that from happening if you have a healthy body and are exposed to something very toxic. Now, we've been sold a bill of goods that every symptom is bad and we got to get rid of those symptoms, when in fact they're immune symptoms, and what we need to do is help the body, if we do anything, to carry that through to a conclusion and then get on with your life. And when you take any kind of substance that turns off the immune system, that causes you to temporarily feel better, then you have interfered with the process and you are in turn creating a future health problem. I've said it many times and I'll say it again. We take a lot of chemicals to give us temporary relief from symptoms at the expense of our health in the future, and we pay a lot of money to do that. Now, I'm going to be doing a broadcast just on the whole idea of health and sickness and attitudes and beliefs about it, and why we are where we are with this outlandish $1 trillion health bill, which we call a health bill, which is really a sick bill. I mean, we wouldn't have a bill like that if we were healthy. It's because we're sick. And it's gotten worse. It's gotten more expensive and it's gotten worse. Why has it gotten worse? Because more people are sick with more chronic things. Now, somehow we're in the dark in our own mind. We've got a filter up there somehow that's filtering out the fact that if all of this expensive stuff were making us healthier, we would be healthier and therefore we would need less of it. But instead, we find that we need more. So we're going to go into that in detail, but I'm not going to do it today because we're into energies today and we want to deal with that. Now, most of you have probably seen the old Einstein equation, E equals mc squared, and some of you probably wonder what in the world does that mean, and other people say, oh yeah, that's basic stuff. That goes back to the early 1900s. Yes, it does, and it's an explanation, really, of the relationship between matter and energy, bottom line, because the E stands for energy in ergs, and the M stands for the mass in grams or kilograms, and the C stands for the speed of light. So this is a formula that says if 1 unit of matter is converted to energy, this is how much energy would be released. And of course we know that did take place when we built the atomic bomb, and that's one of the places this information was utilized. Well, there's another formula that relates to pretty much everything. And once you get into a study of what we're talking about in depth, it's going to make sense to you. But it's called E equals HF, and the H has a little slash, which means that they don't use it too much anymore, but originally they did. That's Planck's constant. Okay, now a constant means that it doesn't change. That number never changes because it's a constant. Okay, so energy is equal to Planck's constant times frequency. So what does that mean? That means energy is a function of frequency. The higher the frequency, the higher the energy. So we know that any wave of electromagnetic information, the higher the frequency of it, the more energy it's carrying. Now, in this other formula also, there is a constant, which is the speed of light. And so therefore, energy is a function of mass. The more mass you have, the more energy you have, but its potential, which is one of the ways that we talk about energy when you study physics, the potential is there to release a lot of energy, but you have to apply some action to release that energy. And of course, in the atomic bomb, what they had to do was take non-fissionable U-238, which is the element uranium, and they had to knock some neutrons out of it and convert it to U-235, which is an unstable isotope, and therefore there's the potential of causing an explosion, a chain reaction explosion. And that's how they created the atomic bomb. Now, we're not going to get heavy into the physics and chemistry of all this stuff, but I'm telling you about this because so many times we're talking frequency, and when we do, we know it's interchangeable with energy, and when we're talking energy, we know it's interchangeable with frequency. And so Planck's constant just helps tell you how much or how you can convert frequency to energy. What's the factor, and that's what it is Planck's constant. Now, I'm not going to get into that. That's more of a subject of physics today. So we're not going to take the time because we cut these broadcasts back a little bit in length. And we're already going to have a 3 broadcast out of this anyhow. So we don't want to do any more to confuse you. What I want to do, though, is give you some, and I'm going to, I don't really want, but I'm going to give you some information that are some places you can look. You know, as I've said before, we give you lots of books, a lot of resources, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it. Now, you might think, wow, this whole energy thing is kind of spooky and kind of off the wall, and I'm not so sure whether I can buy that or not. And, of course, that's your prerogative. You don't have to accept any of it. You can keep your head in a paper bag and not see anything in the world. However, but if you're interested in knowing something more about all of the world and our health and the various things that we're talking about, then these are good resources to go to. Now, most people don't know that the Princeton University, for years, was involved in heavy research in consciousness and reality, and consciousness, as you will see as you get into some of the things that we're talking about, contains energy, and even brain function deals a lot with various types of energy. In fact, the whole body does, and we're going to talk about the different types of things that the body, of energies that the body uses. Well, anyhow, Princeton started now pushing 40 years ago, probably, many years ago, a project in the engineering department, and they called it the PAIR Project, P-E-A-R, which stood for Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research, and it was conducted by the University School of Engineering and Applied Science. And so what they were studying was the interaction of human consciousness with sensitive physical devices, systems, and processes, and developing complementary theoretical models to enable better understanding of the role of consciousness in the establishment of physical reality. Now, as part of that whole project, they set up this global consciousness program, which, again, I'm not sure if any of you have heard about, and it was quite a deal. They put, I think, originally about 30 computers around the world, and they were put into the programming a random generator that just generates random signals. And as it displays on the screen, it's just an erratic signal. There's no coherence to it. I guess that's the simplest way to say it. It's an incoherent random signal. And so it's just being spit out 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, this random signal. Now, the theory was that consciousness affects reality, and since it does, if some major event occurs in the world that would affect everybody in a shocking way, that likely that could affect all these computers and be demonstrable on the screen. And so what they found was, in fact, that's true. For example, the 9/11 incident, all around the world, all the computers that were in operation at the time suddenly had a synchronized spike, meaning they all suddenly created a big spike at the same time, because not only are they recording that, but they're keeping a time track of it too. So they were able to show that around the world, right at the same time, this happened. And other major world events seems to suddenly cause all these random generators to generate a peak or a spike at the same time. Now they have continued, they've expanded it, I think, now to at least 50 or more computers, and now they've turned that portion of it over to the Institute for Heart Math in California, which I've mentioned before, and they're carrying that project on, and they're monitoring major global events as it affects our consciousness, which in turn affects the function of the computer. Now remember, this whole study was to study the effects of consciousness on physical reality. That means everything around us that we see and experience as being real. And so it was a very successful experiment, and they finally closed it down because they felt they had gone as far as they could go. They had trained a lot of people in it. And so, as I say, the computer project got transferred over to the Institute for Heart Math in California, and a group of the people who had gone through the program created another organization called ICRL, International Consciousness Research Laboratories. And they've continued on in all kind of projects. And they do have a website. And if you go on to PAIR, you'll find out about what did happen. But if you go to this one, you'll find that they are active right now, and it's said it was started by about 75 members. Most of them had been trained or in some way associated with the Princeton PAIR project. Now, they have, looks like, come out with a book from the ICRL Press called Quirks of the Quantum Mind, and by Robert G. Jane and Brenda J. Dunn. Now, I know that name is probably not very familiar to you, but if you go back to the PAIR project, those two people were involved in the PAIR project, and they, at one point along the way, published a book called Margins of Reality, The Role of Consciousness in the Physical World, and Robert G. Jane and Brenda J. Dunn. And it was done several years ago. I have the original hardback copy. They have reprinted it in 2009 in a paper copy, and be an extremely good book to read because it has published the results of the things they found out from carrying on that project. And now, as I say, they've published this new book on the quantum mind, the quirks of the quantum mind. Now, what's the quantum mind? We've talked a little bit about quantum physics and how it affects us. In fact, we even have referred you to Fred Alan Wolf. We've referred you to William Tiller and his research on science and human transformation and conscious acts of creation, and some of the material that he's put out about his research. And we've referred to the movie, What the Bleep Do We Know?, which contains a large group of doctors, scientists, and researchers, including Fred Alan Wolf, and that talk about how we influence or in some way change reality. Very good material, and it's something that we need to really lock into, because what it really says is that by enough minds thinking the same thing, we can change the way the world is. Now, there is an organization set up in Hungary called what do they call it? It's the Institute of Budapest, or something to that effect, by a gentleman by the name of Ervin Laszlo. And their purpose is to recruit people from around the world with the consciousness and intent to improve and raise the world to a higher level, and to do it by gaining enough people that it actually creates an influence. Now, see, in quantum physics, that was one of the things that really upset a lot of people, because they found out that the person setting up an experiment, their mind intervention into the experiment changes the outcome. That's why sometimes one researcher or group of researchers will produce a outcome from an experiment, and then some other person who said, boy, that looks stupid, I'm going to try it myself, and it doesn't come out that way. And they say, see, we proved that those guys must have lied, or they had poor research, because look, we did the same experiment and it didn't come out that way. Well, it's because the consciousness affects the outcome. So we're not going to get heavy into quantum physics at this point. We've talked about it before, and at some point maybe we'll go a little further. But if you want to get some basic understanding of it, then you should go to Fred Alan Wolf's book, the original one that he published many years ago for the public, called Taking the Quantum Leap. And he introduces you to the thinking of quantum physics without having to worry about the mathematical side of it, but to kind of get your mind into understanding what we're talking about when we talk about the quantum. And so it's interesting that Jane and Dunn are applying that to the mind. So this is a good book also to get. I haven't read that one yet. No matter how much I've read and how many books I've acquired, they get ahead of me sometimes of what all is out there. Okay, so now the whole purpose of me bringing this thing up about energy and information in the mind is because it's extremely important in health. And we mentioned that there's two big applications. One is in medicine in general, called energetic medicine, and one is in the realm of the mind, called energy psychology. And of course they really all come together, so you're talking about energetic life period. And so I wanted to introduce some pieces of information to get you thinking in that direction, because when we've talked about body-mind medicine and how the mind influences the body, well, this is why, because when we get into the energy side of it, we realize that basically the body is an energy machine. Now, we don't have time to go into great detail today, but I want to talk a little bit about the fact that the body has all these different forms of energy. Now, energy can take different forms, and the body pretty much uses them all. It appears that a human life is the highest level of any of the coming together of matter and energy that we know of. Human life. We know that people have been able to take the chemicals that make up life, but they don't live. And they don't organize themselves in the sense that they replicate and build more, and that they have a consciousness that we know of. Now, every matter has some type of consciousness, but it's not a mind like we have, where we can look at things, we can weigh, we can experiment, we can hypothesize, we can do lots of things. But there is a form of consciousness, even in a single atom, that holds it together. And of course, what holds it together really is information, holds the energy together to form what appears to be a solid atom. And so, as I say, we kind of flirt on the edge, but I don't want to get too deep into it yet, because I want to give you a chance to take some of the stuff we've talked about, go look at it, and then see if it tweaks your interest enough that you'll go on. Now, in the body, we have various ways in which energy is expressed, utilized, or produced. And one, of course, is electricity. I don't know how much you've thought of that there's currents of electrons moving through the body doing all kinds of things. And one of those things is in the mitochondria, in the formation of energy that we can use to move and to carry on body functions and to repair ourselves, replicate ourselves, reproduce ourselves. All of that energy is generated by mitochondria in the cells, which are little subunits, and one part of that is the movement of electrons. And therefore, when electrons move, as they do in a wire, and create a light for us, or go through an electric stove and produce heat for us, or go through other things and produce other forms. So, we can have light energy, we can have heat energy, and so forth. All there's different ways. At any rate, not only do we have electrons moving through the body, which we call electricity, but we have protons moving through the body, which we call proticity, which is talked about a bit by James Oshman, remember we mentioned the book Energy Medicine, The Scientific Basis. So he talks about the movement of protons. And the protons move through, get this, water that is structured in a hexagonal structure will transfer protons along like a electron current. We can have a proton current. And those are necessary. In fact, protons are also involved in the mitochondria to make energy. So I'm wanting to get you into the fact that all these energy things are going on in the body that we never give any thought to. And that's why some powerful energy, like a massive electrical shock, can short circuit everything and either injure or kill someone, depending on where it hits and how powerful it is. And of course, how well the person's grounded. We can be in a high energy field that's not grounded and not feel it so much, or we can be exposed to extremely high frequency, which has lots of energy, but because of the frequency, it doesn't penetrate, it runs along the surface of the body. And it makes a scary looking big spark when you can draw off 1,000,000 volts to your hand, or 500,000 volts, and it not kill you from a Tesla unit. Very simple to do, and we've mentioned about Nikola Tesla before and his work and how important it is. But at any rate, we have in our body electrons and protons moving, so we have electricity, proticity. Now, we have other features of our body that mimic various electronic functions, such as our cell walls tend to function as like a transistor, and allow certain things to happen and not happen. We have the cell membrane that acts like a capacitor, which is what you find in electronic circuits. And the capacitor stores and holds energy or electrons. So when you have a membrane, which is a dielectric, which means it does not move electrons, but it blocks the movement, and on one side of it you have an excess of electrons, and the other side you don't, then you have a electropotential across that membrane that on an average healthy cell would be 70 millivolts. It would be positive on the outside of the cell and negative on the inside of the cell. And so that is important, because if you don't have that potential or membrane potential, the cell doesn't function properly. In fact, you find that with illness, and especially with things like cancer and all that, you have a shift. In fact, it drops. When the cell membrane potential drops down to about 40 to 45 millivolts, the cell can start to malfunction, disconnect, and become a mutant cell. We would sometimes refer to a mutant cell as a cancer cell. And when the cancer cell expands and reduces the voltage down to about 25 volts, it replicates and makes another cancer cell. And it can do that as long as it's getting energy, which of course is made from sugar, and as long as it can get nitrogen, which can help it build more protein, it can keep growing and growing, and there's nothing to stop it. Our normal cells, because they're interconnected and because the information and energy that's flowing through the body keep them all informed, and of course, you know, the term information means to form in or inform. And so the energy is informed what to do, and to do in such a way that produces a healthy cell function. If you disrupt that, then things become chaotic and erratic, and strange things happen. And of course, as we've mentioned before, there's two big aspects to cancer in terms of physical function. One is a mutant cell forming, because it's been in some way disrupted, interrupted, so that it no longer maintains the proper cell membrane potential, and it can draw or disconnect from the rest of the cells and start to function in a different manner, called a mutant cell or a cancer cell. And so that's important to know. But it's also important to know that the body immune system, if it is functioning properly, will be sent a signal to come over to that mutant cell, and at the same time inside the cell, if it were working right, but it can be inhibited from doing that. The signals aren't working right. But if it were working right, it would also start a self-destruct from inside. But because it's not working right, that usually does not happen. So the immune system has to come over and destroy that cell and digest it. Otherwise, you would form a tumor. So we've got the poisoned cell that's not working right, and we have the immune system that would normally get rid of it. But the immune system is subject to other forces, one being the mind, which is more information, and the mind can shut down the immune system, and therefore the mutant cells can just keep growing and growing. And so then you have cancer. So that's one of the reasons why it's important to understand how all this comes together. Now, besides having electricity, proticity, and an electronic nature, which means we have things like transistors, we have capacitors, we also have resistors, which are areas in the body that block or slow down the movement of electrons. And that's a problem. It can be, because then that means that normal function of the body is carried out by information moving all over the whole body, and energy, and keeping everything working together in a harmonized and healthy way. That would be good health. And also, of course, we learn from electronics and electricity that when electricity moves, like the flow of electricity, it creates something called a magnetic field. And if it's direct current, it's a constant magnetic field. If it's alternating current, it would be a pulsed electromagnetic field. Or if it were pulsed DC, it would be a pulsed electromagnetic field. And so we have magnetic fields which are measurable. There's an instrumentation out there that can measure that. The heart gives off a very powerful electromagnetic field, even more so than the brain, but the brain also gives off a lot of electromagnetic fields. It gives off also a magnetic field that can be picked up by a very, very sensitive piece of equipment called a squid, which means a superconducting quantum interference device that can pick up those magnetic fields and demonstrate that the brain is giving not only electrical impulses that are picked up with an electroencephalograph, but it's giving off magnetic pulses. So those are all important. And then there's one other level which I'm not sure how much we'll get into. I know today we're not going to get into because we're already out of time for the day, but we'll be talking about something called subtle energies, and those are extremely important to know about. So I think that's about as far as we want to go today, because next time we want to talk about the implications in terms of energy medicine and energy psychology, and give you some of the, I've already given you actually some of the books on it. I mentioned before, and I don't know if you looked about finding the set of recordings called Energy Medicine. Now these were done by an organization that actually Beverly Rubik, PhD from Temple University, had been heavily involved with the setting up of this organization. And it's called the ISSSEEM. That's a lot of letters, which means the International Society for the Study of Subtle Energies and Energy Medicine. And so this was kind of a conference that was done, and these were several speakers. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 different speakers, and they all talk about different aspects of energetic medicine or energy medicine or energetic healing. And in fact, this is about the future of it. Subtle energies, consciousness, and the new science of healing. Now this took place way back in 1998. If you can find it from Sounds True, I for some reason got too busy to get on Sounds True and see if it's still available. My suspicion is that it is. If you get this, this will give you a good introduction to some of the stuff that was being done in 1998. So now we're talking 15 years after that. And tremendous amounts of stuff have come out now. I mean, around the world. It's in Russia, in Italy. There's tremendous studies going on in France at the Pasteur Institute. In England, Cyril Smith and groups on biomagnetism and bioelectronic interference in the body, and some of the getting down into the very low energy but very powerful effects that are taking place in the body. So if you can find this and listen to these recordings, you would find a good introduction from different directions. And these are people with MDs, PhDs, DOs. This is a gentleman from England, Peter Russell, written several books. And you can get on their websites and you can look at the books they've written. Tremendous energy. Now this is by in no way of complete list. I mean, this is kind of what I would call an introduction. But you get a feel from these different speakers and some of the questions that's asked to him what was going on in 1998, which that was when they were just laying the foundations. Now, you can go back then beyond that and find out things that were happening way, way back. But this one are all people that you would know, either that have research capabilities and training, that they're not talking off the wall. They're talking about their experience with some aspect of energy medicine. It looks like we have run out of time, as tends to happen. I guess that means I'm a blabbermouth and sometimes I talk too much, but I am wanting to interest you in all this and at the same time excite you about it, because it is exciting and there is so much to know about it. And it's so important because if we ever want to reduce this health bill in this country, we're going to have to think differently, because the thinking so far doesn't seem to be cutting it very well. So next time we'll go to part 3 of energy information in life, and want to bring it to a conclusion. I think I've laid enough groundwork to kind of give you some things to think about, and if you are interested enough to take the time to pursue some of the sources that we've just talked about, I think you are going to find it an exciting subject to read about. Whether you even agree with it or not, it's certainly exciting. And if you read any of the books that we've mentioned, I think it's going to really excite you. One that I mentioned before, I need to throw this in real fast. I don't believe I mentioned it, was by Dr. Gary Schwartz, who is a PhD, graduate of Harvard. His specialty is research. He is with the University of Arizona in Tucson, and he wrote a book which would be good for what we're talking about now, called The Living Energy Universe. He also, though, has written several books since then. He's been involved in a lot of research projects. You're going to find him very interesting to read the material, but I'm saying all this to say, even though the news media is not talking about much of anything that we are talking about, it's all out there and it's all being done. It's just that I guess the media today makes so much money off of the pharmaceutical interests and the food processing interests that they don't want to put things on there that might cause people to question what's going on and turn in other directions and cut off their own foot, so to speak, by discouraging these companies advertising when the facts contradict. So I guess you're going to have to do it on your own, at least at this point in time in history. You're going to have to do it on your own if it tweaks your interest. If you are very happy with the way things are going and the way the health of this country is going and the world, then that's fine. If you're happy with it, I'm happy with you being happy with it. However, it doesn't set well with me that we have to spend trillions of dollars for something that doesn't work and only makes us sicker. I like a more optimistic and pleasant outcome. So at any rate, we will see you next week when we go to part 3 and hopefully the conclusion of energy information and life. Until then, be healthy.